Welcome back. Now that we have some experience with the editor, let's talk a little bit more about this green play button. Now, the tooltip says play this level in the active level editor viewport. Notice there's a hotkey for it, Alt-P. Now, if we press this play button, we're actually playing the game, but we're playing in the editor. This is known as Play in Editor, or PIE for short. So if an Unreal Engine developer says, I was play testing in the Pi is the play in editor. It just means you're playing the game from here in the Unreal Engine editor. Notice I still have my mouse cursor, so I'm not actively engaged in playing the game, although the game has started. But if I click in the viewport, that mouse cursor goes away, and I can now look around and use WASD to move around. Now, this is different than moving around in my level in the editor, as we have an active Pi session going on. So there is some built-in functionality here that allows us to move around and fly and look around with our mouse, but this is different from moving around in our actual level without a Pi session going on. Now, you can stop the Pi session. Notice there's a red stop button at the top, but how are you going to click on that if you're engaged in the editor? Well, there are a couple of ways to stop a Pi session. One is with the escape key, and if you hover over the stop simulation button, you can see that that's the hotkey. In earlier versions, it was Shift Escape, but they've since changed it to Escape. So we can press play, we can click in the viewport to engage, and we can hit Escape to get back out. Now, if you don't like the fact that you have to press play and then click in the viewport to engage, well, that's actually a setting that you can change. I'm going to press Escape to stop the Pi session, and I can go up to Edit, and I can change my preference to automatically engage me in the Pi session. To do that, I go to Editor Preferences. And just like in project settings, we have a number of preferences here, but these are specific to the editor itself. And we have a search bar. I can simply search for Game Gets, and I already have results here. The one I'm interested in is Game Gets Mouse Control. And it shows me where in the editor preferences this option resides. It's in the overall category of Level Editor, which is here, under the Play section, which is right here. If I click on Play, now I see all the options under Play, and one of them is Game Gets Mouse Control. If I click on that checkbox and I close my editor preferences, now if I press Play, I'm already engaged in the game. I don't have to click on the viewport first. And this is a setting that they've changed from version to version. In the current version, you have to click to engage. In previous versions, it was automatic, but that is a customizable setting. So I can go back to Editor Preferences, search for Game Gets, and uncheck Game Gets Mouse Control. And now that option is back off. And if you wanted to keep your editor preferences open, you could. You can click the tab. You can dock it right here next to the Basic Map tab. And now your editor preferences are back. And this window will stick around even if you close the engine and come back. It'll remember that you had editor preferences open. So if you want to get rid of it, just click the X. Now, running a Pi session can be quite useful as you're going to play test your games all the time. And you may have noticed there are additional options here next to the play button. If I press play, now that play button has turned into a pause button, and you can pause the simulation. And now you're still in a Pi session, but it's paused. You can resume it, you can engage, and you can move around. Now, if you're already engaged, but you don't want to stop that Pi session, you can always get your mouse cursor back with Shift F1. Now my mouse cursor is back. And notice if I hit stop and play again, there's a little tooltip here. It says click for mouse control, and if I do, now it says Shift F1 for mouse cursor. And that can be useful if you want that mouse cursor and you'd like to go browse through the outliner and select things, or you'd like to pause simulation, and so on. If you pause simulation and press play again, well, I still have my mouse cursor, but if I hover over the viewport, it's gone. But I can always click to engage and Shift F1 to get that mouse cursor back. Now, I mentioned that when you're in a Pi session and you're piloting your camera around, This is not the same as moving around throughout the level in the editor. This is actually playing the game. So you're piloting something, right? Well, that thing that you're piloting is called the default pawn. I'm going to hit Shift F1 to get my mouse cursor back and bring your attention to the outliner. Notice there are more things here in the outliner that seem to have just appeared out of nowhere, and those popped in as soon as we started a Pi session. That default pawn is something that we were actually piloting around, and we can actually see that default pawn if we disengage from it. Up here next to the Stop Simulation button, we have this button, and the tooltip says detaches from the player controller, allowing regular editor controls. There's even a hotkey for it. It's F8. If I click that button to detach, now I can get my regular editor controls. The Pi session is still going. The game is still running, but I can use my mouse to maneuver around and move forward. And if I turn around and look back to where I was, oh, look at this. There's an object there. This is the default pawn that we've been flying around. Now I can reattach to it or possess that pawn by clicking up here. That detach button is now an attach button. It looks like a game controller. If I click on that, well, now I'm at the location of that default pawn. And if I engage, I can fly around and move over here. And I can Shift F1 to get my mouse cursor and click detach and move forward and turn around, and there it is. There's the default pawn. So I'm actually flying around as this default pawn. Now, we can't see it when we're possessing that pawn, because if I move into the inside of this sphere, well, it's transparent from the inside out. That's why we can't see it. But from the outside, we can see that it's just a sphere with a gray checkered material on it. So it's important to realize that in a play session, you're controlling something, and that something is the default pawn. At least that's the default behavior. Later, we'll learn how to control other things and not just this boring gray sphere. But it's important to know that once you start that play session, this pawn now exists. And when I hit stop, look at our outliner. All of those yellow items that had popped in are now gone. If I press play, now they're back. And there are other things that have appeared as well, and we'll talk about what those things are later, but it's important to know that that default pawn has been generated, or as we say in game development, it has been spawned, and that's what you're flying around here in the Pi. Now, this basic behavior is pretty cool. It's pretty fun to be able to fly around, but really, that's a little boring. It's kind of basic. There are so many more interesting things we can do in an Unreal Engine game project, but we haven't learned how to make that happen. And that's why those template projects are so useful. Remember, when we created a new project, we could have started from a template project. And as we learned earlier, we can add template project content to our project. We can open that content drawer and click on Add, and we can choose Add Feature or Content Pack. And we can actually add the content from some of these template projects to our project. So since you know how to actually start a Pi session and play a game project, I'm going to task you with a challenge. So your challenge for this video is to add one of these templates to your project. Now, I recommend that you don't choose virtual reality or handheld VR because these are not designed for our platform, which is a desktop application. So I recommend that you choose from one of the other four: first person, third person, top down, or vehicle. I'd like you to add one of these to your project and then start a Pi session. Press play, engage, and see the functionality that's already coded into one of these projects. Play with the project a little bit and get a feel of something that's not quite so basic, like our basic map. Now, these content packs typically come with levels that showcase the content in the pack. So as soon as you add one of these to your project, you're going to notice that your content folder now has more folders inside of it, and you may have to dig around and try to find the map that showcases the content of that template project. So you're going to add one of these templates to your project and then dig around and see if you can find a map. Go ahead and open that map and play test it. So go ahead and pause the video and tackle this challenge. Okay, so I'm going to add one of these template projects to my project. I'm going to go ahead and choose the third person. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to select it. I'm going to click Add to Project. And now that that's happened, I get a content browser window. It's just popped up. And notice that my content folder has a lot more things in it now. We used to just have starter content and maps. Now we have several other folders, and it's automatically opened up to this BP third person character. But also notice that there's a maps folder in here. If I click on that, we have a third person map. And as we've learned previously, we can double click on a map here in the content browser to go to it. Now, we don't have to use this pop-up content browser window. I can close it. I still have this add content to the project window open. I can close that as well. And from my content drawer, I can find that map. So simply adding that pack isn't going to just magically change our basic map. If I press play, we still just have the basic functionality. I have to actually find the map in that content pack that I've just added, and that's going to be in third person under maps. So I can open this map. I'm going to double click it. It's going to ask if I want to save the changes I've made to my current map. I can go ahead and click Save Selected for that. And here's the third person template map in that pack that I've just added. And I can press play. And now check it out. I no longer have that default pawn. If I detach with the detach button and I move forward and look around, there's no gray sphere there anymore. I'm no longer piloting a default pawn. I now have this character. This is the Unreal Engine mannequin. I'm going to attach again and click in the viewport to engage. And now if I move my mouse around, the controls are slightly different. I'm looking at the character and changing the view around the character. And if I use WASD, I can actually move my character around. In fact, I can press spacebar to jump. So this project contains quite a bit more functionality than just that default pawn. It's actually more like a real game in that I'm running around with a humanoid character. So now that I have some experience with a project that has more functionality in it, I'm starting to see the potential that Unreal Engine has. So it's nice to get a little bit of a feel for more complicated projects that already have some functionality built into them. And we're going to learn how to look into that functionality and see how it was created as we learn more about the engine. And if I want to get back to my basic map, well, we know how to do that. We can go back to our maps folder and double click on basic map. And we're back to our basic map with our default pawn. Now, if you had some trouble finding where that map is in the content pack that you added, there's a way to quickly search your entire content folder for specific types of content. If I go to the content folder and click on it, let's say I'd like to search for just maps. I want to see all the maps in my content folder. Well, I have a search bar and I can type in map, and that's going to show me everything in my project that has the word map in the name. But I can filter this even further. I'm going to click X to get rid of that text that I entered. And right next to the search bar, there's a drop-down. And we can filter our content folder for certain types of content. Now, we'll talk about what these different types of content are later, but if I choose level, now I have my project filtered to show me only the maps. And notice there are a few of them. I can hover over them to see where they are in my project. Under primary asset name, it shows me the path to this particular thing that I've highlighted. Now, the path says game here. That's the content folder. So I can always find where this map is by going to content/starter content/maps, etc. So this advanced lighting level here was added to our project along with the starter content. And if you're feeling curious, feel free to double click on any of these maps to go to them and see what they look like. And hover over them here in the content drawer to see where they exist in your content folder. And perhaps you may wish to start a Pi session in those maps and see what kind of controls you get in those particular maps. Now, once you've filtered for a specific type of asset, you're generally going to want to remove that filter. So simply go back to the dropdown and uncheck the checkbox next to the things that you've chosen to filter. So I'm going to uncheck level, and now I can see everything. So now that we've learned about how to start a Pi session and actually play the game in the editor, we're ready to move on. Great job, and I'll see you in the next video.